Hello, welcome to our film festival, Love Me Crazy Science Film Festival. Tonight we have two special guests here, makers of one of the most striking films that we can probably watch during the festival, The Last Artifact. With me, we have Jaime Jacobsen from Montana. No, you're in Colorado State, right? No? Sorry.
Yes, I changed.
All right, in Fort Collins, I suppose. And Ed Watkins who's hailing from Bristol tonight, and they are both the directors of this incredible film. Uh, First of all, I want to thank you for being here, and also the organizers of Love Me Crazy Film Festival for bringing together such a phenomenal array of movies, of science movies, which not only are good in science, but are also incredibly good at filmmaking. Um, I think that best thing we can do now is to just watch a little trailer, 1 or 2 minutes trailer of this movie to get a taste of what the movie is about. In case you haven't had the opportunity to see it yet, you must watch it. It's mandatory, and then we'll go on straight to the questions. Okay, video on.
I feel like our job is to define objective reality. We're trying to get rid of a kilogram. Mass is still tied to a single artifact in the world. A hunk of metal in Paris.
Anything that you weigh from an apple in a grocery store to yourself on a bathroom scale to drugs at a pharmacy eventually goes back to this prototype.
There's a lot of things to do. It's not enough to work day and night.
Different labs around the world want to find some scientific insight that the others haven't found.
We have only 2-3 months to consider new results. There's a lot of pressure.
Good. So this trailer actually embodies exactly what the movie is about. This is just a story well told, in my opinion, in my not so humble opinion. It's a very good story, very well told, and then it's about a concept which might actually be quite hard. It's a very basic physics concept. So, Jamie, I might introduce you to the audience a little further. Jamie is an independent filmmaker, and she splits her time between Montana, where she was bred and she lives, and also the Colorado State University. Jamie, how did you how could you think about making a movie, an entertaining movie, about a very difficult concept involving, for instance, quantum mechanics, like the Planck constant?
Yeah, this I still think it's probably the hardest movie I've ever made. We'll see how that holds, but I think it's going to hold for quite a while. And it's one of those topics where I never would have thought about making a film about an inanimate object. Like how do you make that interesting? That's what the kilogram is, just a little cylinder. And really, we'll have to hear Ed's story here in a second, because he saw an announcement for the opportunity to tell this story and, let me know about it. And I was just really intrigued by the challenge of how, being challenged as a filmmaker, as a storyteller. How do you tell this story? How do you make it interesting? And I love learning, one of my favorite things about documentary filmmaking is learning about topics that you'd never come across normally, or people or places that you just normally would never hear of or experience if you weren't in this field or profession. So it was really captivating to me on that level. And Ed's a dear friend of mine from film school, like way back. We were, we had all our classes together. But I've since been, working in academia, and he's been doing freelance work, and we live on different continents. And so it was a really neat opportunity for us to collaborate and also, work with a lot of our friends and colleagues that we studied with on this project, and to make a really beautiful science film. So that's really kind of what hooked me, and I was just up for this challenge.
Well, that's certainly a very good motivation. And I suppose that it's also the same kind of motivation that is behind Ed's willingness to engage in such a project. Ed Watkins is a producer and a filmmaker from Bristol, who is also a very an award-winning producer, who has made movies about almost anything. And I've read that one of your projects actually went to the other end of the universe. In this movie, you had to work with the smallest possible thing that ever existed, which is the quanta from Planck. And there is no smaller distance, no smaller time, no smaller anything. And then you went straight into the biggest things in the universe, the supermassive black holes, which is your next project or your last project, right?
No, that's correct. Yeah, I mean, I like to go to the extremes. So just before this project, I was doing a film, Stephen Hawking, about supermassive black holes and all those kinds of things. And then this came up, and it was an opportunity to make a film about possibly the smallest, possibly most inconsequential things, which appeals. I mean, I tend to work across the spectrum. I work in wildlife films, I work in science films. So this kind of caught my attention just because I quite like to make things that are a little bit funny, that are a little bit quirky, that have a little bit of difference to them. I'm quite scientific compared to Jamie. And when I saw this announcement, my first thought was, well, to make a film like this, the scientists are going to need to be people. They're going to need to be real. Otherwise, this is going to become a film that gets bogged down in minutiae, and it becomes very difficult. So I thought of Jamie initially, just straight away, as a person who would be the right person to make this film feel human. And I'd try and take quite care of the kind of more slightly sciencey, quirky side of things while Jamie made the film an actual film. And it seems to have worked out fairly well. So I'm glad we collaborated on it in the long run.
Well, it's really curious, because if you watch the film, there are two quite obvious influences. I'm talking about filmmaking now. And one of them is actually, from my point of view, I might be quite partial to this, and I'm not, I know almost nothing about film, but one thing that struck me a lot was the similarities of some scenes and some camera angles with the classical work by the Eames, Charles and Roy Eames, The Powers of 10, which was also about representing both extremes in the universe, the biggest and the smallest. So when I knew that you were working on this supermassive, you had been working on this black hole project, I couldn't avoid thinking, well, it must be linked, powers of 10, and then going from the smallest to the biggest. So it must be something which should be kind of natural, to a natural appeal to science filmmakers to play with these extremes, as you said.
Oh, definitely. I mean, Powers of 10 is a film that I loved growing up. It's I think they're remaking actually a new version of it, hopefully. But yeah, I mean, that was one of my influences for sure. I mean, the other obvious one is Wes Anderson, running all the way through as a visual, kind of quirky visual style. But no, there always is an appeal. I mean, it's a strange topic, the kilogram. It doesn't speak to anything initially. It's not, most people, when you say a kilogram, won't link it to a thing or an object or anything really. So the idea that you could actually have it links to the smallest fundamental particles all the way through to, I mean, the interesting thing about the kilogram, once it's turned into an equation, is that it absolutely can represent the largest things in the universe as well. So I think just inherently in the storyline, there is that link and, you know, an effort to try and pull them out. It's just natural when we were trying it.
Oh, absolutely. The aesthetics, the Wes Anderson's aesthetics is so prevalent. This symmetry, the center stage occupied by the scientists, and then the surroundings thing, and then it fits so nicely with the olden big K, which is so round, so symmetrical. Whose was the idea about making the thing based on Wes Anderson's aesthetics? Was it Jamie's or Ed's?
I wouldn't claim it would be either of ours necessarily. I mean, possibly a bit more on my side, just because the interesting thing about Wes Anderson's work is I find it very quirky. I think it's inherently about odd things and odd people. And the more the research we were doing dug down into it, the more odd the topic becomes and the more interesting the people became. So it kind of had a natural fit in terms of just how would you stage a science film to make people aware of the kind of inherent strangeness of the topic without making it, you know, science blue and CSI Miami type, the classic Discovery style science shows where they're blue and black and overlit and overcolored. And we both between us decided, we were looking at other films, and Jamie was looking at like Panlevet and a few of the other kind of more esoteric influences in kind of science and natural history filmmaking, and we were just trying to look at what would be a more interesting way of trying to do a science film that wasn't down the standard path of what you'd see on Discovery or Nova, because we had a pretty open, we were very lucky in this that because it was funded by NIST, we had a pretty much carte blanche to do something different when we had channels in mind for distribution, but it kind of gave us freedom, and I'll let Jamie talk a bit more about it, but it gave us some freedom to kind of explore what we thought might be fun for a change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Wes Anderson connection, I feel like it just, I don't know, once the idea was planted in our head, if we just started to see his influence everywhere and the people we'd meet and the places we'd go. But I remember when we did scouting trips really early on in the project and just realized that, the actual laboratory spaces and the offices and the buildings were so symmetrical, which is very key, like not only the sort of the quirky side of Wes Anderson's storytelling, but the visual aesthetic was in these places that we were going to. And of course, the people, we just realized that metrologists are a rather nerdy bunch, they're not sort of these like flashy, like cool scientists. They're very quirky and a unique, kind, so to speak. And we felt like it just played with that, overall stylistic tone, and just started to see it everywhere we go. And then, in terms of other influences, I've always, ever since, it was something a really dear film professor of mine, or of ours, Simon Dixon, showed us, I think our first year of film school. It's called Ilha das Flores, or Isle of Flowers. It's a Portuguese film that was made, I think, early 90s, or no, not a Portuguese film. I'm sorry, it's in Portuguese, but it's a Brazilian film. And, basically the filmmaker Jorge Furtado, he takes a tomato and traces it from its sort of cultivation in the earth all the way up through the food chain, its consumption, and it ends up in kind of a dump at the very end on this island. And the whole narrative is based off of definitions, and each definition kind of builds off of each other and connects all these seemingly disparate elements into kind of the global capitalistic system. And it's really clever and quirky. And, that was another thing where once we had sort of this idea in our head, we started seeing it in our film with the dictionary and this idea of defining a kilogram or redefining our international system of units and measures. So that was another inspiration that we took as well.
Well, you say that those people were quirky, and I can agree. I mean, they are metrologists. They are a very special brand of people. But however, you presented those people in a very human way. How do you manage to take this apparently so esoteric theme with so esoteric people, so intending to get into the last 10th or 20th decimal point, and then making them appear as humans, as we are? Well, they are humans, of course, but I mean, away from this kind of ivory tower, they were actually very down to earth. Did you use any trick in the trade to do that?
Gosh, that's a really good question. You know, I mean, I think some of it was just through the relationship building that trust. The scientists, I think, had to have confidence that we would portray them well. They had to believe in Ed and in me and in our team. And I think they enjoyed our crew, since we did a program, a Master's of Fine Arts program in science and natural history filmmaking. So all of us had you know, interest in science and training in science before we became filmmakers. And I think we're at least, you know, really genuinely curious and interested. And that, I think, helped make, you know, all the people that we interviewed feel really comfortable. We also involved them in the planning process in terms of saying, you know, being upfront about our goals and saying, well, we want to portray you not just in the lab, but outside of the lab, like who you are as a person, other things you do, and how, you know, we had one scientist in Japan who he was a pianist, and he talked about how music, you know, brought inspiration he thought about great composers and how they inspired him to create and develop something new. And so we were looking for these links between their hobbies and their other inspirations and what they were doing in the scientific realm. And I think folks respected that and appreciated that and got on board kind of for that ride with us, which made the whole process really fun.
That's true. It's not often, actually. I don't remember any case in which you presented a scientist as both something which is unfathomable and then a perfectly normal person playing guitar. This is something you don't often see, and all of your presentations were mostly like that. You discover first-class scientist and then a first-class person in a normal setting. That was really appealing in many senses. How long did you spend with them? The production was how long did it take, the production?
The production took quite a long time. It took us about 2 years to make, partly just because of the time. Yeah, well, partly because of the timeline of the event itself. So from when we first started filming, the kind of initial build up to the weighings and submission of results and all those kind of things, through to the final actual redefinition, was about a 2-year period. And we actually started a little bit too late in some ways, because we would have liked to have started a little bit earlier, but the grant kept us to that timeline. But yeah, we filmed each of our interviewees at least twice, maybe 3 times for some of them. I think the only ones we didn't manage to film more than that was the Japanese team, just because it's such a long distance to travel. Mm-hmm. We used a lot of the same cameramen and soundmen on the same shoots whenever we did them. So, and Jamie filmed most of the North American interviews. I did most of the European ones, and Jamie did the Asian ones as well. Mm-hmm. But what was nice was, because we could go back multiple times, we could see how it was developing. We could talk to the folks. I mean, the interviews we did weren't short either. We took a long form interview approach. It wasn't kind of directed questions. It was fairly free form. We had discussions with them about the topics. I would occasionally annoy them immensely by asking them to say it again shorter, but in general, it was kind of fairly free flowing. And I think that helped, because we weren't directing them to say single sentence bites that we wanted. We were genuinely trying to find out more about it. Our soundman, Parker, has a degree in chemistry, I believe, Jamie, I think that's correct. And Rick did maths, I think, and I did natural sciences. So it was kind of, even when we were talking to them, we were genuinely interested in what they were saying about what they were saying, because frankly, a lot of us were struggling to understand it and needed them to tell us what it was about so we could make a film about it. So I think that did help. And also, they were just lovely people. I mean, in general, they were lovely people and were more than willing to give us their time for nothing, which is remarkable, just on that level.
Well, I can confirm that these people think the same about you. They say, and I'm reading literally, well, the crew were a delight. I will tell you later who's telling that, but I can reveal it's one of the persons in the movie.
We'll try and guess.
You might try to guess, and perhaps you will probably know, but still, you have to guess. You have 50 seconds or so to guess. Anyway, well, the movie is, let's go a little bit into science, if you will. The movie is about making the new kilogram, the last, probably one of the last remains in technical terms from the French Revolution, in the sense that, well, finally we can put this big K to rest at last, with two complementary ways to define the last unit that was not defined in terms of absolutely basic, unchanging constants in the universe. So we have this. You very well presented both approaches, the approach by using the quantum mechanics and by measuring to an unprecedented level of precision the value of the Planck constant that measures the relationship between energy and frequency in a photon. And then on the other way, actually, even though the theme of the movie was to do away with the last artifact, well, half of the movie is about making a new artifact. The ultimate artifact, well, a set of artifacts, these balls, these spheres of silicon, which are used to verify the quantum mechanics and vice versa. So you have both worlds, almost purely theoretical one, even although it depends on very accurate measuring systems, such as the Kimball balance, and on the other hand, the interferometry, and then absolutely physical artifact. So the movie goes full cycle from old K, big K, to the new K, the sphere, which is so science-y thing. It's did you think about making this kind of contrast between the theory, the mathematics which is behind the Planck constant, and the absolutely touchable thing made of individual atoms in the ball? This is a theme you also, I am sure you propose your scientist to give you some ideas about this kind of apparent contradiction. Is it any contradiction in it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take this briefly and then I hand over to Jamie, because actually Jamie did a lot of the problem solving on the edit for how we actually made these things work. Because for us, there was always a slight issue with how do you bring in purely theoretical solutions, and then the spheres, which are obviously an artifact. I mean, we're talking about the last artifact and then generating these incredible spheres. And I mean, they were terrifying to look at and to hold. They're worth a few million euros each. And I was tossed one gently by a scientist who was holding it, who told me not to worry because they can't work with them unless you have some respect for them, and was juggling essentially with them. But it gave us quite a bit of an issue when we came to make the final film, because how do you explain that what we're doing is getting rid of these things and then creating new ones? And actually, Jamie was the one who came up with these really nice setups with the children, trying to describe what these objects were, so you can get an idea of them. And then also the kind of idea that actually they're not mutually exclusive. Like, you can have both, and they can both be right. One is a tool, like a calculator, and the other is an equation which allows you to extrapolate. So that's kind of the solution we landed on. And I'll pass over to Jamie, because, as I said, she was kind of the person solving that issue in the edit.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, I remember being generally confused myself, just saying, how are we going to have this? I'm still trying to grasp this myself, that we're replacing this artifact with this sort of other artifact, or we're using an artifact to get us towards the redefinition, and how, like, just sort of scratching my heads over how does that make sense? And, trying to figure out how to convey that to the viewer. And I remember, I don't think I could take sole credit at all. It was really kind of a brainstorming process with two other dear folks, part of our creative team that aren't with us today. Ed's wife, Stephanie Watkins, who was one of our lead editors and writers, and Ben King, another dear friend and colleague who also was heavily involved in the writing and the editing. And we were really kind of brainstorming together. Well, how can we visualize this? How can we convey this concept and this idea that the spheres were counting machines for atoms, and coming up with there's a scene of a little girl shaking a kind of like snow globe. I think it actually had glitter in it, to try and represent all the different particles and how the spheres were actually being used. Because of course you can't see any of that in these balls themselves. So, I think we came up with some beautiful and elegant visual metaphors to help convey the science and help everyone kind of wrap their heads around these rather bizarre concepts.
Yeah, the thing is that you have both both sources of fascination. I mean, as a scientist, I'm fascinated both with. I'm actually fascinated with both the numbers and the trinkets. But in the movie, you have this kind of dual personality. You can fascinate people with numbers, and using these tricks and visual metaphors, which work so well. And then the trinkets, you have this enormous balance, and then the interferometry to measure the roundness of the sphere and the making of the sphere itself. Is so you can appeal to both kind of audiences as well. It's really a good, a well thought way, even though it might have come as a natural result of the nature of the problem, but I think it does work very well. By the way, a 3 million sphere, and then you simply drop it. Was it a prop, I guess?
So that was actually as a direct result of going to see them being manufactured, and they showed us one sphere that has been dropped previously. I mean, they're very hard. They're pure silicon, so they're actually quite resistant to damaging. The problem is once, of course, they're characterized, any damage to the surface is problematic. They have to recharacterize the entire sphere. So they had one that was a kind of a stunt sphere, which was actually the one that was not appropriate to be used, and we had that in our care for a while. That wasn't the one we dropped. We actually, Jamie, where did you source those, or who sourced those spheres for us? Someone in Germany, wasn't it? One of the scientists, I believe, sourced.
I think it was Jens. Jens sent us various, stunt doubles that we could use on set, so to speak.
Yeah, so
they're getting them in through customs, and it was.
We might actually ask one of the members of the movie, which is already online, which is Michael de Podesta, who's there.
Hi, Michael.
You might invite him to join.
Feel free.
He's the one that said that you were at the light as a crew.
He's being too kind.
Okay. Good. Another question from the audience. Thanks you. I'm reading. Thanks you for such an amusing film. Can you tell us some tips to produce a different and fun film about science? Well, it's a tough question.
I mean, I'll just start with don't take science too seriously. I mean, I think the biggest killer for most science films is the topic is treated, and it's the same actually with wildlife and a few other topics in that kind of genre. Everything is always treated with kid gloves in the sense that everything is off the table for comment. And I think one of the things we did start this project with was the idea that you could comment on the process itself and you could comment on the science. So I think to make a good science film, the topic of science also has to be questionable. You can't just take science at its word, at its core values. It is something that is a process. The people who do it are real people. It isn't a thing. Science is not a thing. It's a process, and it's made by the people who do it and the topic itself. So I think that's my base level is always you have to approach it like that. You can't just approach it as something that's different and abnormal or strange.
That's cool.
I love that answer, Ed. It made me think a lot, just, reflecting on your process and hearing you talk about it. That was really beautiful. I feel like one of the things that we strove for when we were talking about our vision for the film as directors and producers in the project was trying to create awe and appreciation in the audience for kind of some of the behind the scenes things, the little things that make our world function the way that it does that we kind of take for granted, or maybe even are highly unaware of in our everyday lives, and trying to kind of pull those out, through the narrative, through the filming, through the visuals, and inspire people to kind of look at the world in a different way or get this new level of appreciation. So I think like finding those little connections to everyday life and prompting people to see their bathroom scale a little bit differently, because their bathroom scale isn't just this sort of random object that they got at a hardware store. It's connected to this incredible international system of weights and measures that all go back to this object that for the past over a century has been in this vault underground outside of Paris, that it's the standard we use to compare to weigh and measure everything in the world, and all of a sudden your bathroom scale is no longer the same. So little things like that I think are really beautiful and can help make the science inspiring and tangible and exciting.
Yeah, I'm thinking about replacing my bathroom scale by watt balance any of these days. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, one of the reasons for this kind of movies is to create in people this to make people think differently, and in that way, they serve the same function as the museums of science, in which you go in, and then you tinker with things, and then you learn things in the fun way. So a movie in just in 55 minutes, you manage to make people think about things that you had never thought before. I mean, we all know what was the meter, and we knew I mean, all people like me, they knew the old definition of meter, and then you take the Earth, and then they divide it in 40,000 kilometers and so forth, and then you look with to all these different kinds of units in system in the system, and then you always thought that the kilogram was the weight of 1 liter of water, and then so you could define water in terms of meters. But yes, this is the kind of movie that shows you that you had to go a little bit deeper into the chess game, and then if you do it in a fun way, as you did, well, it simply succeeds. It's just the way to do that. So creating a good movie about science is especially about making people enjoy that, as some people in our environment told us, and they say they might not know many things about science, but still they understand. If you make people understand what is in, then you have succeeded. That's the thing about good science.
What was quite interesting actually is your tech just before we came on this chat was saying that his mother had watched it, and she's not scientific and she didn't have a background in science, and she really enjoyed it. And that's actually my test for filmmaking. I have what I call my mother test, which is I will show the films I make to my mother, and if she doesn't hate them, that's a good start. And she didn't hate this one, so we thought it might be all right. So yeah, I suggest everyone show their films to their mother first as well.
So your mother is Mrs. Turing, I guess, is the Turing test for this kind
my mum is a wonderful person, and yeah, and she liked the film, and so that's good.
Yeah, every people I've met who have watched the actual film, they say that it's a magnificent film. Even though some of them I think that it's a little bit freaky in the sense that it deals with really weird things, but still, as a film, is absolutely fantastic. Let me go back a little bit about now that we have Michael de Podesta in the audience, among the audience. This is almost a course people with close to 20 scientists or so, or about that. Many of them in the close to retirement, I suppose. Do you keep still in touch with them?
So I'll just offer my apologies to Michael for not keeping in touch as much as I should have since filming with Michael. And actually also we didn't get to include half as much as we would have liked to about a lot of our scientists. We actually had to cut an awful lot of our interviews with pretty much the entire cast down. I mean, Michael's actually were fantastic in general. His interviews, he has a fantastic way of describing things, very unlike like other scientists do. He has a way of telling you really what the things mean, cutting through the description of what it is and actually telling you the meaning behind it. We would have loved to have had a bit more of him in the film, but the problem we actually juggled with throughout the main film was more that we had to fit all these people who were essential to the story and the telling into the film while still keeping them as people, by not just using them as single sound bites, not just using them as a moment in time. And where we could do that, we tried to, but I mean, again, it was an interesting film to make because usually you only have maybe 3, maybe 4 people as the leads, and we had in excess of 20 people that we were interviewing and going back to continuously. So yeah, that was challenging, and we have kept in touch with quite a few of them. It's a bit of a hard ask to keep in touch with all of them. But yeah, I mean, Jamie's been in fairly regular contact with quite a few of the Canadians and Americans.
Good. Well, now I suppose that keeping in touch is a little bit more difficult in the physical sense, and perhaps easier because now everybody is on Zoom. But anyway, now we are in the middle of pandemics, and still you have to still go on making films. What are your next projects? How are you going to cope with the constraints imposed into filmmaking by the pandemics? Jamie?
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple things that I'm working on. With regards to this project, yeah, I really, at first, you know, we were rolling the film kind of off out of the edit bay, getting ready to release it internationally, and the pandemic just implodes. And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, this is the worst time to be trying to release a movie. Like, what's going to happen? And of course, you know, there haven't around the world theatrical screenings and events and things like that that normally bring people together around a project, which I really love. It's one of my favorite parts, is engaging with audiences and talking about what you've just devoted the past couple of years of your life to doing, you know, and having those conversations for me is one of the best parts. So I was really fearful of what was going to happen with this project. That being said, virtual events have taken off. We're here with you today, and it's just a testament to like new ways that people are innovating to share stories and come together. But I think it would have been really hard to be in the production phase. You know, if we were trying to film the movie right now, you know, international borders are shut down, and it would have been an incredibly, if not impossible, task. So, you know, on my end, during the making of this film, actually, I secured a tenure track position at Colorado State, and I teach documentary filmmaking and visual storytelling here. So I'm a bit more sort of a little less mobile in that way now that I'm more firmly rooted in academia. And I am part of an effort here on campus to create a Center for Science Communication. And we're really looking for ways that we can kind of spotlight local stories or inspiration that's happening here on campus, specifically surrounding climate change and COVID, the coronavirus, as kind of the two key scientific issues of our time that especially researchers and students at the university are really, you know, diving straight into trying to figure out how to solve these issues, how to, you know, move forward as a society. So I see, you know, right now I have kind of projects in pre-production where we're looking to launch storytelling efforts here surrounding these two key scientific issues of our time. And I think I was telling Javier before we got started here, I'm working on a project up in Montana where I used to live with a group of Venezuelan migrants and asylum seekers. And it's more of a collaborative, iterative process. And luckily we were able to capture some of their stories before some of the current travel restrictions came into play. So I'm looking at doing more of an interactive website that showcases their stories and these voices that are hard to kind of come by in mainstream media. But it was because I had access to folks and we had relationships that go back a couple of years that we were able to start to gather these stories. So those are kind of a couple things that I'm working on right now, and I'd be curious to hear. Ed and I haven't actually caught up in a while, and I'm curious to hear how he's weathering the storm, so to speak.
Oh, so I'm brokering a new collaboration about you. What about you, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still in production. I finished another series since this show went out. I made a series called Tiny, which went on online streaming, which was interesting. We finished the edit during lockdown, the first lockdown here, which didn't actually affect much because there's only 2 people in the edit to start with. But we've been in production with another series since then for another online stream, another wildlife series. And that one's proving more interesting because we've got to kind of fly around the world to film animals all over the planet. And yeah, we're just trying to find new ways of doing that. So we're using a lot more local crews. We're finding ways to do it remotely. People are going out for a lot longer, you know, crews going out to locations for many, many months on time. But yeah, it's been an interesting one. And it's a shame that we haven't been able to do the kind of post like festival circuit thing with this film, because that was one of the things we were really looking forward to. It's a quirky little film. It probably doesn't have massive mainstream appeal, but it's got an audience and it's fun to talk to them about it. And it's a shame that we haven't actually physically been able to go anywhere to do that. I think Jamie got to go to the actual redefinition in France, which was the closest you can get to a kind of party for scientists. But yeah, it's been an interesting couple of years.
Yep,
sure.
it did. Okay, I think we have to wrap up since we are already past our target time. And I want to thank you both for such a lively chat. You were absolutely superb explaining how the movie was created and made. And well, I really enjoyed a lot. I really want, I'm looking forward to see new collaborations between you both, and new products that might appear on YouTube or in the mainstream media or whatever, which might elevate the average quality of videos that we might want to consume, we have to consume during the pandemics. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you all to the audience also for joining, for the questions, for the interesting questions, and also all the person who joined from the movie, and see you tomorrow in the next installment of our colloquia in the Love Me Crazy Science Festival. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.